Steve shared that after a long, exhausting day, he was looking forward to resting at his hotel when his boss called, demanding he be in the office by 8 a.m. the next day. Without hesitation, he packed quickly and headed to the airport to catch a flight. It was too late to call his wife without waking their sleeping kids, so he asked the taxi driver to drop him off at home. As he quietly entered the house, he noticed only the bedroom light was on and heard his wife's voice along with another man's. Assuming the kids were with relatives, he tried not to disturb them as he approached the room. The realization that his wife was cheating on him made him physically sick. Taking a deep breath, he tried to stay calm and remember the advice his grandparents had given him about controlling his temper. His grandfather had warned him about the destructive power of anger and how it could ruin his life. Instead of seeking revenge, he decided to gather evidence using a new smartphone his employer had provided for testing, equipped with a high-quality camera, microphone, and a modified flash drive to conserve battery. He began his investigation by hiding in the shadows, capturing his wife's infidelity, which shattered his self-esteem. In an attempt to find clarity, he decided to get a DNA test for their children. As he continued recording, he heard something that unleashed a fury within him. Without hesitation, he burst into the room and confronted the other man. A physical fight broke out, and he eventually kicked the man out of the house. His wife, Sheila, cowered in a corner, trembling with fear. He stood still, his voice firm as he ordered her to come closer. It felt like a scene from a movie. Whenever something like this happened, he could never remember the events afterward. "Come here," he repeated. She approached the corner of the bed closest to him. "I'm sorry, Steve," she repeated, pleading and remorseful. Now, he would stay calm, but the beast inside him was still growling and restless. "Do you regret the time you spent with Dan?" he asked, hoping to get more information about her affair. Sheila visibly shuddered, and he couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on and with how many other men. Her eyes were filled with horror and guilt, tears streaming down her face as she begged, "Please, I'm so sorry. Please don't hurt me." His voice was full of anger and betrayal as he shouted, "You lying cheat. You destroyed this house, this bedroom, this bed." His words were like a slap, and he could see the regret and fear in her expression. The anger inside him grew, urging him to keep going. She had betrayed her husband and her children, and he wasn't afraid to say it. As he mentally stroked the furious beast within him, Sheila looked worse, her eyes wide, teeth chattering, her face pale with shock. It was a strange feeling, as if the beast was patting him on the back, promising to always protect him. He gave Sheila an ultimatum: "Pack your things and clear out the room by noon. Take all the bedroom furniture, including the bed, and leave my things neatly on the floor. Respect my property, do you understand?" His tone was firm. She asked in a trembling voice, "How am I supposed to do all this?" But he didn't care. "Maybe you can ask your eccentric brothers for help," he growled. "I see," she murmured weakly. Sheila trembled and covered her head. The creature inside him calmed down, and he grabbed his luggage and headed to the car. He threw his bags into the trunk and settled into the driver's seat. When he regained control of himself, he noticed his broken nose in the rearview mirror, surprising him. He drove to the hospital in his car, despite being in great pain. After undergoing a series of tests, the doctors informed him that he had a broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, a possible concussion, and several cuts and bruises. Despite their recommendation for further medical attention, he refused, as he needed to be at work in the next 2 hours. The police were called as per standard protocol. He explained that he was the victim in this situation, but his memory was foggy. Although he felt severely injured, he couldn't find Mark anywhere in the emergency room to corroborate his story. He underwent a thorough examination, and the results were clear. As a resident of the area and an employee of a prominent company, he was released from custody. One of the officers had a sister who worked at his place of employment, which he informed them about. He also explained that he had been urgently called in for work-related reasons. Given the current economic climate, they didn't want to harm a major employer without valid justification. They believed him, and he left. At the office, he headed to his boss's room. Audrey Hammer, the vice president, had a private room to relax in after showering. He lay down on the bed, still in discomfort from his physical injuries. Audrey mentioned that the next morning, she noticed Steve's car in the parking lot. Despite being the most skilled problem solver on the team, he was constantly overlooked and underpaid. She was determined to make a difference, but to do so, she had to confront her older brothers, who owned a stake in the company. Steve wasn't at his desk, and she hoped he was making coffee. She went to her office and found him asleep on the couch with his luggage. She couldn't help but admire his appearance as he slept. Among all the men she knew, Steve stood out as one of the most attractive. Although she was graying and looked older than she was, he seemed unaware of his own appeal. As she approached him lying on the couch, she was shocked to see his bruised face and the metal splint on his nose. With a shudder, she touched his shoulder, which made him wake up abruptly, but then his usual soft expression returned as if nothing had happened. She turned to Steve and asked, "What's going on, buddy? Looks like you've been through some tough times." He sighed before responding, "Let's just say I came home unexpectedly to surprise my wife, but I ended up being the one surprised. Do you know any good divorce lawyers?" She immediately thought of Heather Alexander, her college friend and divorce attorney. She called her on the phone. "Good morning, Heather. I have a friend who really needs a divorce lawyer, and I was wondering if you could help him. Could you talk to him this morning? Thanks. See you soon." She turned to Steve and assured him that Heather would make time for him. Steve suggested they had a lot of work to do that day and that it would be helpful if she stayed with him while he talked to Heather. She agreed with the idea, but also wanted to hear the whole story. She thanked Steve for being her assistant. He made the job much easier. Steve shared that Audrey, and he spent an hour correcting her brother's mistakes. If only they weren't part of the company, it would be twice as successful. Heather joined them, and he recounted his story without mentioning the creature. He confessed that he had lost control in a fit of rage and shared the video as evidence. The video showed Mark putting Sheila in a tough spot, asking her if she valued him more than her own children. Sheila responded by saying that she was only his and didn't care what others thought. This took Heather and Audrey by surprise. He insisted that he wanted full custody of his children at any cost, even if it meant giving up their assets. The last thing he wanted was to pay child support. His children were now living with his parents, and he wanted to bring them home. "Steve, I'll do the best I can, but getting full custody based on this evidence might not be easy. Your wife could argue that she spoke in a moment of emotion. I'll prepare the initial legal documents for your case. Please give me your wife's contact information and ask her lawyer to contact me," Heather said. The expression on Heather's face turned serious as she continued. "Please try to stay calm and don't make any more mistakes, okay?" He quickly apologized, admitting that he had lost his temper. Audrey assured him, "You're the best lawyer I could have on my side." After Audrey and Heather had a brief private conversation, Heather left. They had been working together for several hours when he suddenly felt incredibly anxious, realizing that Sheila needed to leave his house by noon. Still, he reminded himself to stay calm and trust Heather's skills as his legal representative. Despite his desire to let her stay, the furious monster inside him overruled any rational thought. He regretfully told Audrey that he had some urgent personal matters to attend to, estimating it would only take an hour or two. Apologizing for having to leave, he asked if he could be excused. She assured him, "No problem, Steve. You've been a great help to me." She added with concern, "Just come back soon." As he hurried to his car, he couldn't shake the fear that the monster inside him might reappear. When he entered his driveway, he saw a rental truck and Sheila's brothers loading a mattress into it. His heart raced as he noticed 2 police cars and 3 officers nearby. He quickly grabbed his laptop and nervously approached the officers. "Excuse me, officers," he said, trying to sound calm. "I have a recording from last night that I think might be useful for your investigation. May I show it to you?" The sergeant asked, "Are you Steve Blaine, Sheila's husband?" He spoke firmly, demanding confirmation. "Yes, Sergeant, that's me. I'm willing to answer any questions you have. Would you mind watching this tape?" he added. The officers seemed ready to arrest him, but beneath the stern expression on the sergeant's face, there were kind eyes. "All right, let's see the tape," he said, "but don't move from your seat." He pressed the recording button on the device and turned up the volume. Some neighbors even stopped to watch as Sheila's voice echoed, saying, "I don't care about them." She dropped the box she had been carrying. They turned toward her as she picked up her belongings. In the midst of the chaos, he noticed a bag of white powder falling from the box. Without hesitation, he alerted the sergeant to his suspicions. In response, she ran toward Sheila and urgently called for backup. A scene flashed quickly through his mind, captured on camera, where there was a small mirror on the nightstand with streaks of white powder reflected in it. He showed it to an officer, who then called the sergeant for assistance. Sheila, who was crying and sobbing, was quickly handcuffed by the officer. Her brother stood in shock as they watched the scene. The sergeant firmly ordered them to continue their work while two more officers escorted Sheila away. Confused, he turned to the sergeant and asked for an explanation of what had just happened. The sergeant's response made his heart sink. "Your wife has been arrested for possession of illegal substances." She pointed to a bag on the table. "It's still being tested, but it appears to be powder." Panic set in as he asked about his children. "When can I see them?" "Where are they?" he asked, showing his concern. "They're most likely with my in-laws, not far from here," he responded. "They're your children. Your wife is in custody. If I were you, I'd go get them," she suggested. He didn't need to be told twice. They were very important to him. He couldn't help but worry about potential confrontations in front of the children. The sergeant noticed his concern, and her alarmed expression turned into one of relief. She promised to wait until the situation was resolved to accompany him home. "There will be no aggressive behavior, but we'll need a detailed report of your injuries," she said. "I came home and found my wife in a compromising situation with Mark Rosberg. Shocked and hurt, I decided to record it as evidence. But when my wife made a cruel comment about her children, I completely lost control, and I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that I demanded he leave by noon. After that, I went to the hospital. I don't remember how I got hurt or if Mark was injured," he said. He handed the sergeant the hospital report detailing his injuries. She whistled in surprise. "Does anything hurt?" she asked. "Not yet," he responded, knowing it would eventually but not wanting to think about it. "You also have some impressive eyes," he added, feeling a bit dizzy as he leaned against her parked patrol car. She offered to take him to the hospital, but he insisted he was just tired and had only slept 2 hours. "Hours? I had to pick up the kids and get back to work. Fortunately, my workplace has a daycare, so it'll be fine," he explained. She reluctantly accepted his decision. "They'll take you to your in-laws' house, and you're okay with that," the sergeant added. "The son of my future ex finally left." I locked up the house and got into the patrol car. During the ride, the sergeant gave me some words of wisdom. "If I were you, I'd request temporary custody and a restraining order against your wife so she can't enter the family home or see the children. Since she's in custody now, you have the advantage. Take this opportunity," she advised. I promised I would. As soon as we finished talking, I contacted Heather and gave her all the details. She assured me she'd have everything sorted by 11 a.m. the next day. I started calling the sergeant by her name, Rosemary, and even tried a bit of flirting. She gave me some confused looks, but nothing hostile. "Aren't you a bit too cheerful for someone in your situation?" she questioned. "I have to go pick up my kids," I responded with a smile. I thought it would take weeks to see them again, but fortunately, I have a very strong support system helping me through this difficult time. I don't want to let my wife's betrayal hurt me more than it already has. My marriage may have crumbled, but I refuse to waste time mourning the past. Instead, I'm focusing on appreciating life and being there for my kids. I smiled at Rose and playfully laughed. "I'm going to take a moment to appreciate the little things in life," I said, raising my eyebrows. She responded with a note of confusion. "I don't know if you're being witty, crazy, or just need rest." The tension in my in-laws' house was palpable. After some curt words from Rosemary, they handed over the kids and we left. I always had the feeling that they never liked or respected me, and it wouldn't surprise me if they knew about Sheila's betrayal. My kids rushed toward me, their faces lit up with excitement at the sight of the police car. My 5-year-old daughter, Hope, begged to hear the siren, while my 3-year-old son, Luke, asked if he could sit on Aunt Rosemary's lap. Despite being introduced as their aunt, Rosemary looked at me with an expression that mixed amusement and disappointment. Hope asked, "Will you visit us at our house, Aunt Rosemary?" To which Rosemary responded, "I'm afraid not, sweetie. My schedule is pretty full." Curious, I asked, "What are your work shifts like, Aunt Rosemary?" She responded cautiously, "I work from 8 to 5 every day of the week." I smiled. "That means you can join us for dinner tomorrow at 7:30. Maybe you can even show Aunt Rosemary your impressive doll collection." My daughter's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful, Dad," Hope said. "I hope so," I responded. "You wouldn't want to disappoint Hope, would you?" I asked Rosemary. She gave me an innocent look. "All right," Rosemary said softly. "What do you want for dinner, Hope?" "Chicken. How about chicken?" I asked. Rosemary's gaze turned toward me. "I'm doing this for the kids. You seem a bit distracted, so I think I should keep an eye on you." Rosemary asked if I needed to bring anything. I suggested salad, and Hope agreed. When we arrived at my office building, Rosemary stopped the car to let us out. "They'll get the ice cream," Rosemary confirmed. "Thank you, Aunt Rosemary," Hope repeated. Luke nodded in agreement and also thanked her. "Goodbye, Rosemary," I said as I waved while she drove away. Rosemary said, "What am I doing?" "Steve might be implicated in Mark Grossberg's accusations. I can't believe they sent me to his house. I've always admired Steve Plain. I thought I'd have to arrest him. It's been 2 years since I first saw him in the park with the kids. His presence, his style, his voice, and his grace made my heart stop for a moment. He could easily be a model." Over time, more and more women started going to the park on Sundays when he was there. Sometimes we even chatted briefly. "Did you see him last weekend?" He did something incredibly kind. I was taking pictures of the scenery, and Steve appeared in some of them. I didn't realize I'd soon have to arrest him. Luckily, things didn't go as I expected. He complimented my eyes and flirted with me playfully. It's probably because he hasn't been intimate with anyone in a while. It must be that I'm the least attractive woman in the world. My features resemble those of a brick and a bulldog. And yet, he kept flirting with me. It's almost a miracle that he had bruises on his face. I don't know if I could stand in front of him with his usual leading man appearance. I had to resist the urge to scream and behave like a teenage fan meeting her idol. I reminded myself to stay calm, as they knew me as Aunt Rosemary to his kids. My role was clear: get a statement from Mark Grossberg during my visit with him. Steve tells me, after dropping the kids off at daycare, I hurried to Audrey's house. My actions were strange, maybe from exhaustion or the lingering effects of the breakup. But I felt more determined and even flirted with Rosemary instead of mourning the end of my marriage. It felt like it had been over for a long time. Some unknown force was protecting me from the pain, and I prayed it would continue. Audrey and I completed our tasks for the day in this strange state. "Audrey, I have a feeling I'll be exhausted tomorrow. Can I take the day off?" I asked. "Of course, Steve, I can call you, but feel free to rest at home. I'm sorry for the situation you're in." "Good night," Audrey responded. "Good night, Audrey," I said. My main concern was my broken ribs, as they could hinder my movements and make it difficult to care for my kids. We took a taxi back home, and I decided to order pizza for dinner. Hope and Luke were curious about their mother's absence. I told the kids that Mom and Dad had disagreements, but we still loved them as much as ever. As a result of the fight, Mom would be staying at Grandma and Grandpa's house for a while, but I assured them she was okay as long as I stayed with them. "We're tired of staying at Grandma and Grandpa's house," they both said, hugging me tightly. I realized they had probably spent countless nights at their grandparents' house, maybe while Sheila was having an affair. I could feel a deep anger brewing inside me. That night, I quickly found and hired an emergency babysitter to come the next morning at 7 a.m. I left the spare key under the door, just in case. Realizing that lack of sleep and pain would make it hard for me to wake up in the morning, I transferred most of our savings from our joint accounts to my checking account and canceled all our joint credit cards. I considered emptying our safe, as I was the only one with the key, but for now I decided to put everything on hold and think it over carefully. With everyone sharing a bed in the guest room, I wouldn't have to run down the hall if the kids woke up at night. However, that morning, it was them who woke me up. "Dad, there's someone at the door," Luke and Hope exclaimed in unison. Just as I was about to grab my phone, it started ringing. Gloria from the babysitting company contacted me and asked if I was home. I confirmed that I was and thanked her for coming. I also informed her that I was feeling tired and had hidden the key under the door for her convenience. She was to come in and go upstairs as soon as she arrived. When she heard the sound of the front door opening, she immediately went upstairs. A woman in her 50s entered the room, and I quickly explained the situation. I needed to get Hope ready for daycare, and then she would take care of Luke for the rest of the night. Without delay, she got to work, showing a lot of affection toward the kids. Thanking her, I took the opportunity to rest for the rest of the day. A messenger from Heather's office arrived at my door with two important documents: a temporary custody order and a restraining order against my wife. I received a call from Heather shortly after, informing me that Sheila had been served divorce papers while still in jail. It seemed likely she would be released that night. Given the charge of possession of a banned substance and her criminal history, it might have worked in my favor to get full custody of our kids. Gloria went to pick up Hope from daycare, while I made a quick stop at the bank. I bought a new safe and transferred most of the content from the old one. Discreetly, I left Sheila's items in the old safe at the bank across the street. After opening new accounts in my name, I transferred funds from my checking account to my savings account. When the divorce is finalized, I don't mind Sheila getting her fair share. However, for now, I don't want her wasting money on illegal substances or bail. Surprisingly, I was feeling quite well despite the pain that had finally started to set in. It wasn't as unbearable as I had feared. My nose seemed to be the most affected area. I made a mental note to stop by the grocery store later and buy some chicken for dinner. Gloria left around 5 p.m., and just in case, I asked her to come back tomorrow. Rosemary arrived hurriedly, and we had a pleasant dinner together. Hope was curious and asked to see Rosemary's gun, but she took the time to carefully explain its danger. Rosemary must have noticed my appearance, as she constantly asked about my well-being. I probably looked terrible, but I made a conscious effort to seek Rosemary's company. I convinced her to join us for a children's movie and then persuaded her to buy some gifts for the kids later. I pretended to be tired and asked her to stay with me for another movie, claiming I'd feel calmer knowing she was there in case my condition worsened. Oh my God, I'm sweating. While we were watching the second movie, she revealed how she had interrogated Mark Rosberg. She made me swear not to divulge her words to anyone. She found Mark staying at a hotel in a neighboring town, and he was visibly scared of me. According to him, I had cornered him in the bathroom and assaulted him without provocation. Rosemary showed him a video in which he supposedly lunged at me from the bed. She then detailed my injuries and compared them to his cuts and bruises. She informed me of his willingness to take legal action against me, but warned that I could do the same to him. If he had done such a thing, he would have faced serious consequences, even prison. In the end, Mark decided not to press charges. I explained that due to my lack of memory about the incident, I didn't want to press charges either. I made a mental note to send a copy of my video to Mark's wife. Rosemary left at 11, and I went back to bed with the kids. As the days passed, I avoided any interaction with Sheila and asked her to communicate only through my lawyer. Although my ribs healed in 3 weeks, my nose was still sore. I made some changes to my bedroom, including repainting the walls and adding new moldings and curtains. Finally, I installed a bedroom set that I really liked. It was a large bed with a canopy, accompanied by matching furniture, all made of dark, sturdy wood. I was very happy with how it turned out. I managed to convince Rosemary to come to my house most nights. I hadn't taken the next step with her yet, but it was definitely in my plans. However, my nose needed time to heal before I could do anything. It was still throbbing with pain. Work was going well despite having to be away from home some nights. Fortunately, I was able to hire Gloria to cover for me during those times. Audrey, my supervisor, did her best to limit my out-of-town trips. After numerous visits, the doctor informed me that my nose was perfectly fine. To avoid going home early, I pretended to feel fatigued and convinced Rosemary to stay out late at the movies. I got us each an ice cream cone, and we sat together on the couch, closer than usual. We quietly enjoyed our dessert while watching a movie. I wanted her to relax and enjoy herself before I made my move. Finally, I put my arm around her shoulder and pulled her closer. She looked at me and asked, "What are your plans for today?" My nose is completely healed, according to the doctor. I feel confident enough to take a step toward you. That's why I'm acting like this right now, I explained. She asked, "But why do you want to kiss me? Look at me. I'm not attractive." I gently pressed my finger against her lips to silence her. I reminded her that she was a vibrant, healthy woman just like me. She had beautiful eyes, a lovely voice, and a wonderful personality. I admire that she took care of herself and stayed in shape. And most importantly, I like her a lot. With that said, I nervously asked if we could kiss now. She tried to protest, but I couldn't wait any longer. I leaned in and kissed her passionately. The rest of the night was a blur as we lost ourselves in each other's company, and we didn't even finish the movie we had started. Unfortunately, the night eventually came to an end, but she agreed to come again tomorrow. Rosemary reflected to herself in perplexity. The most attractive man in town wanted to see me again. I had only kissed one other man before, who was considerably older, unattractive, and drunk. But with Steve, things are going very well. I mentioned the fact that Gloria sometimes took my kids to spend the night and then asked if she was free on Saturday night. After she said yes, Rosemary enthusiastically invited me to see her apartment. She greeted me at the door dressed in a dark blouse and black pants. I couldn't help but wonder why women always seem to choose dark colors. Why not wear bright, cheerful colors? I joked with her as we entered her home with a bouquet of long-stemmed roses and a box of chocolates in hand. I approached her, and her cheeks flushed with joy at the sight of the gifts. I leaned in to kiss her, feeling the excitement of being close to someone again after almost 2 months, but I had another idea first. "What's for dinner?" I asked enthusiastically. "Chicken in the oven," she responded. "You can turn it off," I said, unable to contain my anticipation any longer. She agreed with a smile, but started to say something before I interrupted her. "I'm sorry, Rosemary, but I can't wait any longer," I said honestly, and then we lost ourselves in each other. As we lay together afterward, I tenderly watched her, grateful for this moment of bliss and connection. When I leaned in to kiss her again, she returned the kiss with enthusiasm and fell asleep. The chicken was a bit burnt, but still quite edible. We ate generous portions and some garlic bread to replenish our energy. She only managed to finish 2 pieces. Rosemary said to herself, "Here I am, sitting in my kitchen with an amazing man who is currently naked." The love we just made exceeded my expectations for a first time. After eating something and brushing our teeth, we cuddled on the couch and watched TV together. I couldn't help but feel proud. Someone as ordinary and insignificant as me had managed to capture the attention of such an attractive man. For 15 minutes, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. On the other end, my neighbor and dear friend Beth was screaming in my ear. "Rosemary, are you okay? We were all about to break down your door, but then we remembered you're a cop," she said urgently. "Don't worry. Everything's under control," I reassured her, lying in Steve's embrace and apologizing. "I'm sorry if we disturb you tonight." "I have a visitor," I said. My friend asked curiously, "Is it that handsome guy from yesterday?" I confirmed with a nod. "Yes, absolutely." Steve nodded, leaning in to give me a kiss. The sound of laughter, cheers, and whistles filled the air outside as my neighbors celebrated. As a cop, I took pride in protecting and serving my community, and I had formed close friendships with many of the single women living nearby. Tonight, I planned to keep them awake all night. I really hoped they wouldn't involve the authorities. We spent the entire night wrapped in each other's arms until we fell asleep. When Steve woke me up, he was already washed, dressed, and as handsome as ever. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to take care of my kids," he said. She gave him a sleepy smile and said, "I'm sorry." When he opened the door and stepped over the threshold, I looked down and checked my spies before closing and securing the door again. Bright flashes of light blinded me as I left the room. 5 women, some with cameras, applauded and cheered for me. Feeling a bit self-conscious, I gave a small bow and thanked them politely. Then, in unison, they extended their right hands toward me like royalty. As I walked down the hallway, I hummed an Irish melody my grandfather had taught me, and I could hear their sighs of admiration behind me. In the coming months, I couldn't spend many nights with Rosemary because of Hope and Luke, but the ones we shared were filled with happiness. Despite this, our relationship faced 2 main challenges. The first and most difficult was Rosemary's tendency to emotionally isolate herself. We made progress in our connection, but then she would suddenly retreat behind the walls of her own making. Physical intimacy was satisfying, but there was a lack of emotional bonding. The second problem was that it bothered me that she always wore dark colors, as if she were in perpetual mourning. Black or gray were her usual choices, occasionally interrupted by a white blouse that still seemed somber. I wanted to shake her and demand that she wear brighter colors and stop looking so melancholic all the time. As my divorce proceedings progressed, we had a court date scheduled. Heather proposed a settlement, but it was rejected despite her warning that it was their best chance for a fair deal. From Heather, I learned that my wife's affair had started about 6 months before I caught her with Mark. It all began when my former friend Dan invited her to a party while I was out of town. He got her drunk and gave her illegal substances, which lowered her inhibitions. This led to a 2-month affair filled with wild parties every time I was away. Fearing that I would eventually find out, Dan handed Sheila over to Mark, with whom she continued to cheat on me until I finally caught her in the act. Sheila was found guilty of using illegal substances and was sent to rehab, where she is still receiving treatment. She maintained the mistaken belief that I would forgive her and agree to shared custody of our children. As a way to persuade me, she shared her story with Heather and even offered to have her therapist speak directly to me. Despite our unsatisfactory intimate life, she willingly engaged in promiscuous relationships with Dan and Mark. It was evident that she knew she needed help for her addiction, but chose not to seek it while I was home. Instead, she neglected me and our children. She often left them in the care of her parents while I was away. After my parents' death, my grandparents fought tirelessly for 4 years to get me out of foster care and gain custody of me. On the other hand, my wife handed our children over to her own parents while she engaged in extramarital affairs. Her parents never approved of me or our children because they thought I was too attractive and not masculine enough for their daughter. They were harsh with our children, believing that beauty equated to weakness that needed to be toughened up. I decided that my children would never see their grandparents again, and my disapproving relatives would no longer enjoy the fruits of my wealth. After months of anticipation, the day of our divorce hearing finally arrived. Each presented their case before the judge, who carefully reviewed the evidence and observed us both in person. It was evident to her that my wife was unstable, and she approved our divorce under the terms I had initially requested from Heather. This infuriated Heather, but I felt satisfied with the outcome. In our divorce, my ex-wife was awarded half of our retirement account assets, but not my company pension. I also had to give her half of the equity in our house. However, I got full custody of our children, while she only received 2 supervised 4-hour visits per month. Neither of us had to pay child support as part of our agreement. I was required to keep her on my health insurance for 5 years unless she remarried. After deducting the loan she had made to her family, she was left with approximately. Additionally, they had told me to return the sum of $25,000 and sign a loan agreement for the remaining $75,000 at a 12% interest rate over 10 years, using their house as collateral. Sheila cut ties with her parents and siblings after that incident. "Steve, thank you for helping me," Sheila said. "I'm glad to see the woman who bore my children at her best," I responded. "I know I've hurt you deeply, and I still need therapy. Can I stay in the guest room to reconnect with my family?" she asked. "Sheila, I have a proposal, but you might not be interested. You've hurt me deeply emotionally. If you decide to stay, it will involve the responsibilities of managing the house and caring for our children. I'll set strict boundaries to try to rebuild trust. Please think carefully before making a decision," I said. Sheila visibly reacted to my words. I advised her to take time to think about the proposal and discuss it with her therapist. "Steve, please know that I truly regret my past mistakes," she assured me. "However, I can't trust you the way I used to." "One more thing," I said. "Before you make a decision, please understand that if you accept, the house will be constantly monitored by cameras. It might be difficult for you to deal with this, so don't agree until you understand all the consequences." Sheila finally accepted, despite her therapist's disapproval. We made arrangements for her to continue her therapy while living here. I prepared a separate room for her and implemented strict guidelines. She also agreed to resume using contraception and allowed me to choose her wardrobe. I compensated her for doing household chores and taking care of the kids, a decision my children appreciated. I rekindled my relationship with Sheila without any romantic entanglement and made sure to set clear boundaries. I confided in Audrey about my current dynamic with Sheila, but she wasn't worried about her. Instead, she expressed concern for me and wondered if my chaotic lifestyle would prevent me from finding genuine love. I shared with her my interest in another woman who was currently unavailable, but I assured her I had a plan for our future together. Audrey was happy that I wasn't getting stuck in a relationship with Sheila. Audrey said that although she cared deeply for Steve, he had a history of making unwise decisions. However, he seemed to perform better when in a stable relationship. When Rosemary left and before Sheila returned, Steve's level of competence seemed to slightly decrease. He was still above average, but not at his usual exceptional level. Steve's eyes had a focus I couldn't quite pinpoint. Watching him was one of the few joys I had, but it was hard to see him with those bruises. The focus in his eyes only seemed to intensify, so maybe I should stop bothering him about his personal life. I really hope he finds happiness with the new woman he has in mind. When my brothers and I became owners of our company, each received 25% of the shares, and the remaining 25% was sold to the public. Over time, I acquired even more shares of the company, increasing my stake to over 35%, while my brother's combined stake was less than 20%. Steve was tasked with securing an additional 16% of the votes so I could replace my older brother as CEO of Hammer Incorporated. Initially, he secured the support of employees who recognized and valued my contributions to the corporation's success. His charismatic personality also won over most of the female shareholders, who owned more than half of the remaining shares. The power transition was peaceful, and my older brother retired to a relaxing life in the Caribbean. After much reflection, I decided to reward Steve for his hard work and dedication with bonuses and a well-deserved promotion. Although I couldn't make him president, he was more than deserving of the manager role. To celebrate, I took him to dinner at an elegant Hilton restaurant known for its delicious ribs. As we sat down to eat, I expressed my gratitude, saying, "Steve, we did it. You've been an exceptional employee and a tremendous help over the years." As we toasted with glasses of wine, I could feel Steve's nervous energy. He seemed about to embark on a bold adventure. In addition to the generous bonus, I want you to accept the role of vice president and do an excellent job running the company without interference. Audrey, you're doing a good job running the company without interference. I have no doubt you'll have great success, he added. His words were flattering, but I couldn't accept the promotion. "I'm sorry," I responded, "but I can't accept the position." My stomach was in knots, and I almost spat out my wine. Why would Steve do this? Perhaps he was upset about not being chosen for the presidency. As I mentioned earlier, there's a woman I'm interested in. Unfortunately, our company's policy prohibits any relationships, so I'll have to resign if I want to pursue her, Steve stated. It seemed clear that he had developed an interest in another colleague at Hammer, but I was determined not to lose Steve. I was willing to change the rules, and it was necessary. 2 weeks ago, in preparation for our potential relationship, I had made a conscious effort to avoid any contact with Sheila. Although she pretended to be disappointed, I could tell my actions had truly brought her to life. Having gone through a full medical exam and received a positive report, I felt completely prepared to start my new journey with Steve. Why is he suddenly telling me this? I thought, I can't let him go. I was gently holding his hand as he looked at me with such intensity. Why? My mind was racing. "Audrey, dear, would you like to dance?" Steve asked, suggesting we go to Hilton for their famous prime rib and taking care of all the arrangements. He had orchestrated this entire situation with minimal effort. He lifted me from my chair. I was stunned. "Steve, I'm much older than you," I said, but he insisted, saying I was the one he wanted to dance with. We danced without wanting to stop. The food at our table had gone cold, but it didn't matter. At that moment, Steve's eyes looked at me kindly as he spun me on the dance floor. Despite not having a room, this place offers room service. Don't think I'm bad, but I've been waiting for this moment for a while, Steve said, handing me a room key card. Then the most skilled negotiator in the world leaned in and kissed me. If it were up to me, I'd do it for any company without thinking twice, I thought. I followed him as he led me to the elevator. We went up to his room, and there we shared a night. As we lay entangled in each other's arms, I whispered, "Steve, I love you," over and over. After years of longing for him, Steve finally confessed his love for me in return. Since I can remember, I've had feelings for you, but I was too scared to confess them. I constantly told myself that I was too old and unattractive for someone like Steve, who looks so incredible. But today, he surprised me by confessing his love. Love. It feels like a dream. A wonderful, kind, and intelligent man truly loves me in return. Please, don't let it end. I want to be the source of his happiness. On Monday, I urgently convened a board meeting with the president and informed them that Steve had resigned. The women on the board were surprised and concerned. They always looked forward to their interactions with Steve during his visits. I shared that Steve had been in a romantic relationship with a coworker and had left the company to pursue this person. Everyone praised Steve for his honesty and integrity, but also recognized the value he brought to the company. It was clear that the current policy needed to be reconsidered. In fact, I suggested that Steve take my former position. The new president, Mary, looked at me suspiciously. She pointed out that Steve hadn't revealed who he was in love with, and since we were close friends, she assumed he had told me. All eyes in the room turned to me as they awaited a response. I responded with excitement that it was me, which led to an excited chorus of applause and congratulations from everyone in the room. For 3 months, Steve and I made love. His insatiable appetite and stamina often left me exhausted. He confided that since discovering his wife's infidelity, he had become a wild animal in bed, and I was more than willing to match him. After all, he was my partner, and taking care of him was my top priority. As we talked about the future of our relationship, the pregnancy test showed a positive result. With trembling hands, I confessed to Steve that I hadn't been taking my birth control pills. To my surprise, he was overjoyed and proposed marriage immediately. I couldn't contain my happy acceptance. Our wedding was modest but extravagant, with 100 guests accommodated in the luxurious ballroom of the Hilton Hotel. Hope scattered flower petals. Luke had the rings, Heather was my maid of honor, and Steve's best friend was Rosemary. The judge who had presided over our family estate just in time for my brother's retirement officiated. After we married, Steve's entire family, including his ex-wife Sheila, moved into the house. I allowed Sheila to stay because I didn't want our children, Hope and Luke, to feel like they were losing their mother. Sheila continued to work as a maid, nanny, and mother, but with a substantial raise in her salary, despite Steve's insistence that she wear colorful clothes. Sheila still wore the bright outfits he chose for her in an attempt to feel more carefree. I also started wearing vibrant colors. My heart broke every time I saw Sheila looking at him with longing, but he refused to believe that she loved him. At 4 months pregnant, taking care of Steve became a challenge. Even before showing physical signs, I was already struggling to meet his needs. The stress returned to his eyes, and it was clear he wasn't in the best state. It didn't take much to upset him, so I knew I had to proceed with caution, but I had a plan. Steve had always been there for me, steadfast in his love and support. So when I needed someone to replace me while I focused on the pregnancy and childbirth, Sheila and I came up with the idea that she would take my place. Her enthusiasm was indescribable, but I reminded her that she needed to consult with Steve before making any decisions. He felt guilty and devastated by his lack of self-control, feeling like a failure as a husband. Seeing him cry was something new for me. Tears streamed down my face as I joined him in his crying, admitting that I felt like a disappointment for not being able to support and protect my partner. He asked me to promise that I would still love him, even if he acted on impulse with Sheila. He also asked me to have total control over his inner demons. In the 7th month of pregnancy, Rosemary arrived at our door with red eyes from crying. Rosemary had become a dear friend to me over the past year. Falling into my arms, I wondered who could have inflicted so much pain on this strong and resilient police officer. She hesitated to confide in Steve, but chose to trust me. It turned out that her boyfriend, whom she adored, wasn't the person she thought he was. She was horrified with herself for having accepted some of his demands before regaining her self-respect. In retaliation, he revealed her actions to her superiors, ruining her credibility in the professional world. I knew exactly what to do in this situation. I quickly contacted Heather, gave her the name of Rosemary's ex-boyfriend, and explained what needed to be done. Additionally, I had been contemplating the idea of establishing a corporate security department at my company, and Rosemary's situation only solidified that decision. I decided to hire her as the new project manager and have her start building it immediately. This would solve two problems at once, which I found appealing. Heather managed to sue the irresponsible jokester for all his current and future assets over the next 2 decades. In 6 weeks, he was fired from his job. Rosemary was excelling in her new role, but seemed to be battling depression at home. After much convincing, I got her to come live with us. Every time she saw Steve, there was a sadness in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask her why she had left him. Her response broke my heart. She didn't feel worthy of his love and companionship. What a ridiculous idea. I was 8 months pregnant, and for the past 3 months, Steve hadn't felt any real love. I confessed this to Rosemary, but she was hesitant and worried that it might damage my marriage. Steve and I had been friends for nearly a decade. He was someone I could trust without hesitation. He had never cheated on me, always telling the truth. At that moment, I shifted the focus and gave control to him, but if things got too intense, I knew I could stop him, and he would listen to me. That was all. But when I talked to Steve, he expressed an even greater concern than Rosemary's. It took a lot of convincing, but I finally persuaded him. Can you believe that a wife has to convince her husband to sleep with another person? Steve also feared that one day I would want to sleep with someone else. I assured him that would never happen. He was the perfect person for me. But then Rosemary joined his group of lovers. Her transformation was incredible. I encouraged her to update her wardrobe and try new styles. She started wearing vibrant colors and even wore a dress inside the house. This brought joy to Steve, and when he's happy, we all are. It's amazing how contagious happiness can be. I never thought I'd have a family of my own. I always imagined myself as a single woman without children, but now I'm expecting a baby. I have 2 wonderful stepchildren, an incredible husband, and maybe even some sisters instead of my useless brothers. In just 1 year, Margaret tells Steve, furious with rage, that his life was chaos. He couldn't deny that he enjoyed it, but at the same time, he felt guilty about it. Between Audrey and the Beast, it seemed like he had no control over his own personal affairs. To make matters worse, the Beast seemed to have developed feelings for Audrey. Steve desperately needed someone to trust, to receive guidance, and to regain a sense of control. His thoughts were consumed by the sudden change in his life. His heart was beginning to soften toward Sheila again, but he had to keep her at bay due to the overwhelming burden on his shoulders. Steve found it difficult to seek outside support. Instead, he turned to writing as an outlet for his emotions and thoughts. Despite his struggles with the Beast, Steve had a weakness. When he was with his children, the Beast seemed to leave him alone, and he wasn't completely controlled by it. Recognizing this vulnerability, Steve's psychiatrist planned to use it to his advantage. As I sighed in frustration, I couldn't help but think that I must be the most unfortunate psychiatrist in the country. I had 2 appointments on my schedule today. The man who called earlier sounded a bit unbalanced, but I would do my best to help him. It was time to resume my earnings, so I picked up my current pocket romance. With only 2 weeks left until the deadline, my editor demanded that I finish the manuscript. I had 30,000 more words to write. The sudden ringing of the phone snapped me out of my concentration. Janice, my secretary, informed me that there was an appointment in 2 hours. Her voice was slightly breathless, which increased my growing sense of urgency. With resignation, I got up from my desk and headed toward the door. A man entered holding a child in his arms. His appearance was strikingly impressive, and I couldn't help but think that he would be the perfect model for the cover of my next novel. I quickly composed myself and put on a professional expression. "Calm down, Margaret," I scolded myself inwardly. "Focus on the task at hand. Dr. Huff, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Steve Plain, and this is my daughter Victoria," he said. I got up from the table and approached the baby. It's not common for people to entrust their children to me. Looking at Victoria, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with love and tenderness toward her. The man in front of me seemed too good to be true. "Why is he here? What can I do for you, Mr. Blaine?" I asked. "Oh, please call me Steve. I have a rather unusual situation," he said. "It's hard to say if I have a split personality. I've written down my thoughts and experiences in a journal, almost like a story of my life. It might take you some time to read it all, so please charge me for my time. But I hope you'll read it, and we can discuss it when we meet next week," he added, looking at me with an expression of desperation. "Would I do anything for him? Maybe even donate my kidney?" "Absolutely, Steve. See you next week," I responded. Over the next 7 days, I eagerly read Steve's notes. I couldn't believe it. I must have reread the journal at least 5 times, examining every photo Steve had included. Not once did he mention that any of the women in his life were less than stunningly beautiful. One photo caught my attention, a picture of one of those perfect family Christmases I'd always dreamed of, but never had the chance to experience. In the photo, Steve was sitting with 3 women, 2 children, and a baby, probably Victoria, all comfortably seated on or next to him on the couch. To his left, an older woman cradled Victoria in her arms. To his right was a pregnant woman who wasn't conventionally attractive. Sitting on the floor by his feet was another plain-looking woman dressed as a maid, also pregnant and accompanied by 2 children. I couldn't believe what I was seeing in this photo. Every night, I looked at it as I hung it on the mirror in my bedroom. I studied his face and then mine, comparing every feature. To be honest, I didn't think I looked less attractive than the woman sitting next to Steve. How lucky was she? Steve returned the following week, again with Victoria. After hearing his story, I understood. Steve is talking about that monster, I reminded myself, knowing of his struggles in the foster system. The creature probably emerged after your last traumatic experience. It seems to have a protective role rather than a harmful one, as described in your accounts. I'm not sure if it's a manifestation of your subconscious or a true split within you, but I recommend that you reframe your perception of it, from a demon to a cohabiting entity. Choose another name for it. Show it some respect. "I think you're right," he said. "It was my protector in its own twisted way, but I couldn't help but like it," Steve admitted. "Can you think of a name for it?" I asked. He laughed, and I felt my cheeks blush. "What about Bob? It's a funny nickname. Who's ever heard of a monster named Bob?" I suggested. Squinting thoughtfully, he laughed. "I think Bob really likes his new name." I couldn't help but smile at the sound of his contagious laughter. "And I think he likes you too, Doctor," he added. His cheerful tone only increased my amusement. A wave of shame and humiliation washed over me as I heard those words. My patients usually avoided looking directly at my face. They found it too difficult. In fact, I didn't have many clients because of my appearance. After just one session with me, most sought another therapist. When we talked, Steve never avoided eye contact with me. There wasn't a hint of disgust in his kind gaze. "Have you accepted the new role?" I asked. "Yes," Steve responded. "Audrey thinks my problem-solving skills will be wasted as vice president. She seemed to resent the long nights, but that's what ultimately led to my promotion as a board member and special assistant to both Audrey and the company president. Now I work no more than 30 hours a week, and I must admit I enjoy the extra time with my family. Both Audrey and Mary are quick to assure me that I'm a valuable asset to the company." As the days passed, Steve's desperation only grew. Audrey insisted on bringing another woman into his home because she was pregnant again, and 2 more of his friends were also about to give birth soon. She was worried that Steve wouldn't receive attention during this time. This unacceptable situation needed to be addressed. Such behavior wasn't acceptable in an educated society in this country. "Steve, I see you're upset. I can go talk to Audrey. She loves you very much. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully," I said. Steve's face reflected fear, but he nodded slowly as the words reached him. Audrey means everything to me. You can socialize with her, but please don't ruin it for me, Steve pleaded. I'll do my best, I responded. The situation was getting out of hand. If things went wrong, I could lose my license, but I knew I had to do something. Upon arriving at Steve's house, I remembered that he was on a business trip and had the opportunity to talk to Audrey about him. Audrey had already agreed to meet with me. I spent hours talking to her, explaining Steve's concerns and doubts. Despite being aware of the social barriers they were breaking, Audrey was content with her life and didn't care about society's opinion. Though I admire your confidence, Audrey, please remember that Steve is a good-hearted person. He believes he's manipulating all of you, betraying your marital vows. We'll have to persuade Steve that everyone is truly happy with this arrangement. I'd suggest that he receive therapy from a highly trained therapist, perhaps even daily, to address these issues properly, I said gently. A smile spread across Audrey's lips. What's your message, Margaret, if you don't mind me calling you that? Audrey asked. Steve mentioned that you're looking for a new woman, and I'm interested in applying for the position. I murmured the last part, hoping Audrey wouldn't catch it, but her smile only widened. Audrey says that the following Christmas, our Blaine family sent their Christmas wishes in the photo. Steve is surrounded by 4 women with smiles on their faces. 3 of them have babies in their arms, and the 4th is pregnant and radiant with happiness. The lack of a baby in her arms doesn't diminish her joy because she's also expecting a baby. Audrey dear, I turned to Steve. Is something wrong? Steve responded. I've noticed that Judge Gran has been appearing frequently since our wedding. Are we in some kind of trouble? I asked. Don't worry, Steve. There's no problem. However, Bobby and I are expecting a baby again, and we need to make sure you're also well taken care of. That's why I've contacted Bethany Grant. She's always shown interest in you, I responded. And so the story ends. Thank you for your valuable time. Give me your generous likes, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.